3:17 in the morning. Victor Ashford sat frozen in his leather chair, the glow of 6 security monitors casting shadows across his face. His coffee had gone cold 4 hours ago. His empire waited for decisions he could not make. But none of that mattered now, because on screen number 3, something was happening that made his hands tremble. The maid was in his daughter's bedroom. She was kneeling beside the bed, holding his 9-year-old daughter in her arms. And she was singing. Victor turned up the audio feed, his breath catching in his throat. The maid's voice filled his speakers, soft and ancient, carrying a hymn about shepherds and lost sheep and a love that never let go. And then his daughter moved. Melody, who had not heard a single sound in 5 years, reached up and placed her small hand directly over the maid's heart. Victor leaned closer to the screen, certain he was imagining things. But then, a daze, the woman he had suspected of betrayal for weeks gently took Melody's other hand and placed it against her own throat, and she kept singing. For 20 minutes, Victor watched his deaf daughter feel music for the first time in her life. He watched her tears turn from pain to wonder. He watched her small body relax into the arms of a stranger who had become something more. When the song finally ended, Adaze's hands began to move in sign language. Her gestures were slow, unpracticed, but unmistakably intentional. You are never alone. God hears you. I hear you. Your mama hears you. Melody's hands trembled as she signed back, and the words she chose shattered Victor Ashford completely. Does my daddy hear me? Victor's chest seized. His vision blurred with tears he had not cried in 5 years. Adaze paused. Her own eyes glistened. Then she signed her answer. Your daddy's ears are hurt, but his heart is learning. Give him time. Victor pushed back from his desk, gasping for air. He replayed the footage. Once, twice, 7 times. Each time, his daughter's question hit him like a hammer to the chest. Does my daddy hear me? And for the first time since his wife died, Victor Ashford understood the truth. He had been watching his daughter through cameras instead of holding her in his arms. He had been so obsessed with protecting himself from pain that he had left her alone in hers. He had installed surveillance to catch betrayal, and instead, the cameras had exposed the greatest betrayal of all, his own. Now, before I tell you how Victor got to this moment, and before I reveal what happened next, I need you to do something for me. If you believe that miracles still happen through ordinary people, if you have ever experienced unexpected kindness that changed your life, drop a prayer emoji in the comments right now. And if you are new to this channel, hit that subscribe button and turn on notifications, because this story is about to take you on an emotional journey that will stay with you long after it ends. Now let us go back 5 years, back to the day Victor Ashford's heart first turned to stone. The world knew Victor Ashford as a man who had conquered everything. His net worth exceeded $12 billion. His name appeared on buildings in 7 major cities across 3 continents. When he walked into a boardroom, grown men adjusted their posture and waited for permission to speak. He had started with nothing, built everything, and answered to no one. Magazines called him ruthless. Competitors called him untouchable. His employees called him sir with voices that trembled slightly. But Victor had not always been this way. There was a time when Victor Ashford laughed easily. There was a time when he came home early just to have dinner with his family. There was a time when the mansion on the hill was filled with music and warmth, and the sound of a woman's voice singing in the garden. That woman was Isabel. She was everything Victor was not. Where he was calculated, she was spontaneous. Where he was guarded, she was open. Where he trusted numbers and contracts, she trusted faith and intuition. Isabel believed in God with a quiet certainty that Victor never understood. She prayed every morning. She sang hymns while she cooked. She told Victor that his success was not luck or skill, but blessing. Victor would roll his eyes and kiss her forehead. Whatever you say, my love. But secretly, he wondered if she might be right. Because meeting Isabel was the only thing in his life he could not explain through logic. She had walked into his world and made everything brighter. They married within a year. Their daughter Melody arrived 2 years later. And for a brief, beautiful season, Victor Ashford had everything. Then came the spring afternoon that ended it all. The sun was warm that day. The roses in the garden were blooming. Isabel had gone outside to cut flowers for the dining table, the way she did every week. 4-year-old Melody was playing by the fountain, chasing butterflies and laughing. Victor was in his study, finishing a call that could not wait. He heard the scream from 3 rooms away. By the time he reached the garden, Isabel was on the ground. Her pruning shears had fallen beside her. Her eyes were open but unseeing. Melody was kneeling beside her mother, shaking her shoulders, crying words that no one answered. "Mama, wake up. Mama, please wake up. Mama, why are you sleeping?" Victor dropped to his knees and gathered his wife in his arms. Her body was warm. Her heart was still. "Brain aneurysm," the doctor said later. "Catastrophic. Instantaneous. There was nothing anyone could have done." Victor heard the words, but they did not register. How could there be nothing? He had $12 billion. He had connections in every hospital in the country. He had never failed to solve a problem in his entire career. But Isabel was gone, and no amount of money or power or influence could bring her back. The funeral was 3 days later. Hundreds of people attended. Business leaders, politicians, society figures who had envied their love and now mourned its end. Victor stood at the graveside in a black suit, holding his daughter's hand, and felt something inside him close forever. "If this is how you work," he whispered to a God he had never believed in, "then I want nothing to do with you." He never prayed again. The months that followed Isabel's death were brutal. Victor threw himself into work with a fury that frightened his closest advisors. He acquired companies like a man possessed. He crushed competitors without mercy. He worked 18-hour days, then 20-hour days, until exhaustion forced him to sleep. But no matter how hard he worked, he could not outrun the grief, and he could not face his daughter. Every time Victor looked at Melody, he saw Isabel. The same eyes, the same smile, the same gentle way of tilting her head when she was curious. Looking at his daughter was like looking at a ghost, and Victor could not bear it. He told himself he was protecting her by keeping his distance. He told himself that his emotions were too unstable, that he might say or do something that would hurt her more. He told himself all the lies that broken fathers tell themselves when they are too afraid to feel. But Melody felt his absence. Of course she did. In the weeks after her mother's death, the little girl began to retreat into herself. She spoke less. She smiled less. She spent hours alone in her room, holding her mother's photograph, waiting for her father to come comfort her. He never came. 3 months after the funeral, the school called with concerns. Melody was not responding to her teachers. She seemed distant, distracted, lost in her own world. Victor hired specialists, psychologists, child trauma experts. He threw money at the problem because money was the only language he still knew how to speak, but Melody continued to fade. Then came the appointment that changed everything. The audiologist's office was cold and clinical. Victor sat in a plastic chair while Melody underwent a series of tests. He expected to be told his daughter was depressed. He expected recommendations for therapy in time. What he did not expect was the doctor's face when she emerged from the testing room. "Mr. Ashford," the audiologist said carefully, "I need to discuss your daughter's results." "What is it?" The doctor hesitated. "Your daughter is not responding to sound. We conducted multiple tests, and the results are consistent. Melody has profound sensorineural hearing loss." Victor stared at her. "I do not understand." "Mr. Ashford, your daughter is deaf." The room tilted. Victor gripped the arms of his chair. "That is impossible. She was hearing perfectly 3 months ago. She was speaking. She was singing. She used to sing along with her mother." The doctor nodded gently. "We see this sometimes with severe trauma. The mind retreats from sounds that are too painful to process. What begins as psychological can sometimes become physiological. The neural pathways that process sound can essentially shut down. So it is temporary. You can fix it." Another hesitation. "We will do everything we can, but you should prepare yourself for the possibility that this condition may be permanent." "No, Mr. Ashford, no." Victor's voice cracked. "I will take her to every specialist in the country. I will fly her to Europe, to Asia, wherever the best doctors are. I have the resources. I will fix this." The audiologist looked at him with a mixture of pity and understanding. "Mr. Ashford, I know this is devastating news, but some things cannot be fixed with money. Some things can only be lived with." Victor did not hear her. He was already pulling out his phone, searching for the best hearing specialists in the world, refusing to accept what he could not control. He did not fix it. Over the next 2 years, Victor took Melody to 37 specialists across 4 continents. He spent millions on experimental treatments, cutting-edge technology, alternative therapies. He exhausted every medical option available. Nothing worked. Melody's hearing did not return, and slowly, painfully, Victor was forced to accept what the audiologist had told him that first day. Some things cannot be fixed with money, but Victor did not accept it gracefully. Instead, his grief transformed into something darker: control. If he could not fix his daughter, he could at least control her environment. He could eliminate surprises. He could create order in a world that had proven itself chaotic and cruel. The Ashford mansion became a fortress of rules. Every staff member was given a detailed manual of conduct. No loud noises, no unexpected visitors, no disruption of any kind. Anyone who broke protocol was terminated immediately, without warning and without exception. Victor installed security cameras throughout the house. He monitored every room, every hallway, every corner of the estate. He watched his staff with suspicious eyes, looking for any sign of disorder. And he watched his daughter. But he watched her through screens, through monitors, through the cold distance of surveillance. He rarely entered her room. He rarely sat with her at meals. He communicated through interpreters and housekeepers and carefully scheduled appointments. He loved her. God help him. He loved her more than anything left in this broken world. But loving her hurt too much. And Victor Ashford had learned that pain was something to be avoided at all costs. So the years passed. Melody grew up in a house full of expensive things and empty spaces. She learned sign language from tutors who came and went. She attended a special school 3 towns away, returning each evening to a home where her father barely looked at her. She had everything a child could want, except the one thing she needed most: her father's presence. Then one autumn evening, 5 years after Isabel's death, everything changed. Mrs. Pemberton had served the Ashford family for nearly 2 decades. She was the head housekeeper, a stern woman with iron gray hair and eyes that missed nothing. When she requested a meeting with Victor that October night, her expression carried unusual weight. "Sir, I need to inform you about a staffing change. One of our housemaids resigned last week. Her replacement starts tomorrow." Victor barely glanced up from his documents. "Handle it." "I intend to, sir. But I thought you should know. The new girl is somewhat unconventional." That word made Victor pause. He did not like unconventional. Unconventional meant unpredictable. Unpredictable meant loss of control. "Explain." Mrs. Pemberton folded her hands. "Her name is Adais. She comes highly recommended from an agency that specializes in immigrant placement. She was born in Nigeria, raised in a small village before coming to this country 8 years ago. Her references are impeccable, but she has certain habits, sir. Religious habits. She prays throughout the day. She reads scripture during her breaks. She sings hymns while she works." Mrs. Pemberton paused, watching Victor's face darken. "I know how you feel about such things, given everything that has happened. Given that God took everything from me." Victor's voice was ice. "Yes, I remember. I can reject her application, sir. There are other candidates." Victor turned back to his papers. His jaw tightened. Something flickered in his eyes that Mrs. Pemberton could not read. "No, hire her." "Sir, hire her, but watch her closely. I want cameras installed in every room where she works. I want daily reports on her activities. I want to know exactly what this woman does in my house." Mrs. Pemberton nodded slowly. "Very well, sir." She left without another word. Victor sat alone in his study, staring at nothing. He did not know why he had agreed to hire a woman who prayed and sang and believed in a God he despised. Maybe he wanted to prove his suspicions right. Maybe some buried part of him hoped he would be wrong. Either way, the decision that would change his family's destiny was made in 30 seconds of cold calculation, and he had no idea what he had just set in motion. Adis arrived the next morning with a small suitcase and a smile that seemed too bright for the gray October sky. She was tall, with skin the color of rich mahogany and eyes that held a quiet depth. When she spoke, her voice carried a musical accent that rolled like distant thunder. She moved with a grace that seemed out of place in the cold marble halls of the Ashford mansion. "Thank you for this opportunity," she said to Mrs. Pemberton as she was shown to her quarters. "I will work hard. I will honor this house and everyone in it." Mrs. Pemberton studied her with skeptical eyes. "See that you do. Mr. Ashford values order above all else. There are rules here. Follow them precisely, and you will have no problems." Adais simply nodded, her smile never wavering. The other staff members watched her arrival with mixed reactions. Some were curious about the new girl. Some were hostile, suspicious of her foreignness and her open displays of faith. A few whispered behind her back. "She will not last a month," one maid muttered. "Mr. Ashford will fire her the moment she steps out of line." But Adazia seemed unaware of the whispers. Or perhaps she simply did not care. For the first few weeks, she proved herself an exemplary worker. She cleaned rooms with meticulous attention. She polished silver until it gleamed like mirrors. She washed windows until they seemed to disappear. She was punctual, efficient, and thorough. But she was also different. Every morning before sunrise, Adazia knelt beside her bed in the servants' quarters and prayed for 30 minutes. Her prayers were quiet, personal, spoken to a God she clearly believed was listening. During her afternoon break, she sat in the servants' garden and read from a worn leather Bible. The pages were soft from years of handling, marked with notes and underlines in a language the other staff did not recognize. And when she worked, especially when she thought no one was watching, she sang. Her voice was unlike anything the household had ever heard. It was deep and rich and somehow ancient, carrying melodies that seemed to come from a place beyond this world. Sometimes the songs were in English, old hymns about grace and mercy and a love that never failed. Sometimes they were in her native Igbo language, words that hummed with the weight of generations. The other maids would pause their work and listen, caught off guard by the beauty of it. But Victor Ashford did not pause to listen. Victor watched. From his private study, he monitored the camera feeds obsessively. He told himself he was looking for signs of theft, signs of deception, signs that this strange woman was not who she claimed to be. People who smiled that much were hiding something. People who prayed that openly had ulterior motives. People who sang with such joy in a house full of sorrow were either fools or frauds. Victor was determined to discover which one Adazia was. The first incident that caught his attention happened on a Tuesday afternoon. Victor was reviewing security footage from the previous day when he noticed something unusual. The camera in the garden had captured Adazia during her break. She was sitting on a stone bench reading her Bible when one of the older gardeners approached her. Roberto was 73 years old, a quiet man who had worked the Ashford grounds for over 30 years. He walked with a limp from an old injury, and his hands shook slightly from arthritis. On the footage, Victor watched Roberto approach Adazia hesitantly. The old man seemed embarrassed about something. He was gesturing to his knee, explaining something Victor could not hear through the silent camera feed. Adazia closed her Bible immediately. She stood up, took Roberto's arm, and helped him sit down on the bench. Then she knelt in front of him and began to examine his knee. Victor leaned forward, watching intently. For the next 15 minutes, Adazia massaged the old gardener's leg, applying pressure to specific points, working methodically until Roberto's pained expression softened into relief. When she finished, she helped him stand and watched him take a few steps. Roberto's limp had improved noticeably. The old man reached for his wallet, clearly offering payment, but Adazia waved him off with a warm smile. She said something Victor could not read on her lips, then returned to her bench and picked up her Bible. Roberto stood there for a long moment, looking at her as though he had witnessed something extraordinary. Then he turned and walked back to his work, moving more easily than he had in years. Victor replayed the footage 3 times. What did she say to him? What was she doing? Was this some kind of scheme, some way to earn the staff's loyalty for purposes he could not yet see? He flagged the footage and made a note in his file. Watch closely. The second incident happened 3 days later. One of the kitchen staff, a young woman named Lucia, had been having a difficult week. Her mother was sick back in Guatemala, and she did not have enough money for a plane ticket home. She had been crying in the pantry when Adazia found her. Victor watched the camera footage of their conversation. He could not hear the words, but he could read the body language. Adazia sat with Lucia for nearly an hour, listening, holding her hand, letting the young woman pour out her grief. At the end of their conversation, Adazia reached into her pocket and pulled out an envelope. She pressed it into Lucia's hands. Lucia opened the envelope and stared at its contents. Her face crumpled. She began to cry harder, but differently now. These were tears of relief. Through the silent footage, Victor watched Lucia mouth the words, "This is too much. I cannot accept this." Adazia simply shook her head. She signed something in a gesture Victor could not understand. Then she hugged the young woman and left. Victor checked Lucia's personnel file. She had mentioned requesting an advance on her salary to help with the family emergency. The request had been denied according to company policy. What had Addie's given her? Victor's suspicion deepened. She was building alliances. That had to be it. She was buying loyalty with acts of kindness. She was positioning herself for something. But what? He doubled his surveillance of her activities. Then came the moment that changed everything. It was a Saturday afternoon, 2 weeks after Addie's arrival. Victor was in his study, reviewing the weekly security summary, when movement on one of the monitors caught his eye. The camera in the children's wing showed Addie's entering Melody's playroom. Victor's attention sharpened immediately. He had given strict instructions that staff were to minimize contact with his daughter. They were to clean her rooms and provide meals, nothing more. But there was Addie's, walking into the playroom where Melody sat alone with a forgotten coloring book. Victor's finger hovered over the intercom button that would summon Mrs. Pemberton. He was ready to give the order for immediate termination. But something made him pause. On the screen, Addie's did not approach Melody directly. She simply sat down on the opposite side of the small table and waited. Her face was calm, patient, unhurried. Melody did not look up. She was used to being invisible to the adults in her life. Addie's picked up a crayon and began to draw on a blank piece of paper. Her strokes were clumsy, childlike, deliberately imperfect. She drew a lopsided sun with uneven rays. Slowly, Melody glanced up from her coloring book. Curiosity flickered in her eyes. Addie's held up her drawing and pointed to it. Then she pointed to Melody. Then her hands began to move. Victor leaned closer to the screen, his heart suddenly pounding. Addie's was signing. Clumsily, imperfectly, but unmistakably. She was communicating in Melody's language. You, beautiful, like sun. Melody's eyes went wide. I learned for you, Addie's signed, her movements slow and deliberate. Because you important. Victor watched his daughter's face transform. The guardedness she always wore began to crack. And for the first time in months, Melody smiled. Victor sat back in his chair, his chest tight with an emotion he could not name. She was learning sign language. The woman he had suspected of betrayal had been secretly teaching herself to communicate with his deaf daughter. Why? What could she possibly want? Victor's suspicion should have intensified. Instead, something far more dangerous began to happen. He began to hope, and that terrified him more than anything. Now I need to pause here and ask you something. Have you ever met someone whose kindness made you suspicious? Someone who seemed too good to be true? Maybe you later discovered they were exactly who they appeared to be. Or maybe you discovered something else entirely. I want to know. Drop a comment below and tell me, do you think Victor's suspicion is justified, or is he letting his pain blind him to something real? And if you are new to this channel, we tell stories every week that touch the heart and remind us what really matters in life. Hit that subscribe button and join our family. Now let us continue, because what happens next is where things start to get really interesting. Victor's surveillance became an obsession. He told himself it was due diligence. He told himself he was protecting his daughter from a woman who clearly had hidden motives. He told himself all the lies that suspicious minds tell themselves when they cannot accept the possibility of genuine goodness. But the truth was simpler and more frightening. Victor could not stop watching because Addie's was giving his daughter something he had been too afraid to give her himself. Connection. Day after day, the cameras captured moments that dismantled his defenses. He watched Addie's teach Melody to braid hair, their fingers moving together in patient repetition until the little girl mastered the technique. You doing wonderful, Addie's would sign, her face beaming with pride. Melody would grin and try again, her small hands weaving patterns that became more intricate each day. Victor watched them garden together in the side yard, their hands buried in soil, planting flowers Melody chose from a catalog Addie's had shown her. What this one called? Melody would sign, pointing to a bloom. Addie's would fingerspell the name carefully. D-A-H-L-I-A. Dahlia. It means dignity and elegance. Like you. Melody would roll her eyes the way 9-year-olds do, but she would be smiling. Victor watched them sit side by side on the library floor, Addie's reading children's books aloud while simultaneously signing the words. Her voice carried melodies that Melody could not hear, but somehow the little girl always watched her lips move, fascinated by the shapes and rhythms. One afternoon, Victor watched Addie's let Melody climb onto her back for a piggyback ride through the garden. They galloped past rose bushes and fountain edges, Melody's silent laughter visible in the shaking of her shoulders, the tears streaming down her cheeks from pure joy. Victor realized with a start that he could not remember the last time he had seen his daughter laugh like that. Had he ever made her laugh like that? The question haunted him. He began to arrive at his study earlier, staying later, finding excuses to monitor the cameras that showed Adeza and Melody together. He told Mrs. Pemberton he was concerned about protocol violations. But Mrs. Pemberton had worked for Victor long enough to know when he was lying. "Sir," she said one morning, hesitating at his study door. "If I may speak freely." "What is it?" "The new maid, Adeza. Some of the staff have noticed that she spends considerable time with Miss Melody. I am aware. Should I remind her of the boundaries? We could limit her access to the children's wing." Victor was quiet for a long moment. His eyes drifted to the monitor showing the playroom, currently empty. "No," he said finally. "Let her continue. I am still assessing the situation." Mrs. Pemberton nodded and withdrew, but her eyes had seen something in Victor's face. Something she had not seen in 5 years. Uncertainty. Victor's investigation into Adeza's background intensified. He hired a private investigator, one of the most expensive in the city. He wanted every detail of her past, where she grew up, who her family was, why she came to this country, what secrets she might be hiding. The report arrived 2 weeks later. It was thorough, professional, and deeply anticlimactic. Adeza Okonkwo had been born in a small village in southeastern Nigeria. Her father was a schoolteacher. Her mother was a seamstress. She had 3 younger siblings, all still living in the village, all supported by the money Adeza sent home each month. She had come to America on a work visa 8 years ago, following a distant cousin who had promised her employment. The cousin's promises had not materialized. Adeza had spent her first 2 years in the country working 3 jobs, sleeping 4 hours a night, saving every penny she could. She had never been arrested. She had never been involved in any legal disputes. She had never missed a rent payment. She had no debts except the ongoing support she provided her family overseas. She attended church every Sunday at a small Nigerian congregation 45 minutes from the Ashford estate. She volunteered at a food bank on her days off. She had once donated a kidney to a stranger she met through her church. The investigator's conclusion was simple and direct. Subject appears to be exactly who she claims to be. No evidence of deception, hidden motives, or concerning behavior. All references describe her as exceptional in both character and work ethic. Victor read the report 3 times. Then he threw it in the garbage. It had to be wrong. People like Adeza's did not exist. There had to be something the investigator missed, some angle he had not considered. Because if Adeza was genuine, if her kindness was real, if she had entered his house with nothing but good intentions, then Victor would have to face a truth far more painful than betrayal. He would have to admit that he had been wrong. And Victor Ashford did not make mistakes. Yet the cameras kept recording, and the footage kept showing him things that cracked his carefully constructed walls. One evening, Victor watched Adeza enter Melody's room to perform her usual cleaning duties. Melody was at her desk, struggling with homework from her special school. The assignment involved matching pictures with words, a simple vocabulary exercise. But Melody kept getting frustrated, erasing her answers, starting over, her small face crumpling with defeat. Adeza noticed. She stopped her cleaning and approached the desk quietly. "Hard?" she signed. Melody nodded, tears threatening. Adeza pulled up a chair and sat beside her. She looked at the assignment, then at Melody. "Together?" Melody hesitated. Then she nodded. For the next hour, Adeza helped Melody with her homework. She did not give answers. Instead, she broke each problem into smaller pieces, asked guiding questions, celebrated each small victory with exaggerated enthusiasm. When they finished, Melody's paper was complete, but more importantly, Melody was smiling again. Adeza signed, "You smart, you strong, never forget." Melody signed back, "You stay?" The question was so simple, so desperate. Adeza's face softened with something that looked like love. "I stay. Long as you need." Victor turned away from the monitor. His vision had blurred, and he did not want to admit why. The next morning, he almost fired her. He had convinced himself overnight that this was all an elaborate manipulation. Adeza was playing the long game. She was winning Melody's trust so she could eventually leverage that connection for money or fame or access to his fortune. He summoned Mrs. Pemberton to his study. "The maid," he said. "Adeza, I want her terminated." Mrs. Pemberton's expression flickered with something Victor did not expect. "May I ask why, sir?" "I do not need to explain my decisions. See that it is done by end of day." Mrs. Pemberton stood very still. "Sir," she said carefully, "I have served this family for 18 years. I have never questioned your judgment, but I must tell you something before you proceed." "What?" "Your daughter spoke this morning." Victor froze. "What did you say?" "Miss Melody spoke, sir. Not signed. Spoke. Out loud. She said Adiz's name while they were having breakfast together. It was just one word, but it was clear. The kitchen staff heard it. I heard it." Victor's chest constricted. "She has not spoken aloud in 5 years," Mrs. Pemberton continued. "Not since she lost her hearing. The speech therapist said she might never speak again because she could not hear herself. But this morning, she said that woman's name like it was the most natural thing in the world." Victor could not respond. His throat had closed completely. Mrs. Pemberton held his gaze. "I will process the termination if you order it, sir, but I wanted you to know what you would be taking away." She left the study without waiting for an answer. Victor sat alone for a very long time. When he finally moved, it was to reach for his monitor controls. He rewound the footage from the kitchen camera, searching for the moment Mrs. Pemberton had described. There it was. Adiz and Melody sitting at the small breakfast table in the staff kitchen, far from the formal dining room where Melody usually ate alone. They were sharing a plate of fruit, signing to each other, smiling at some shared joke Victor would never understand. And then Melody's lips moved. Adiz. The sound was captured faintly on the audio feed. It was rough, unpracticed, the voice of a child who had forgotten how to speak. But it was unmistakable. Victor played it again. Adiz. And again. Adiz. His hands were shaking when he finally stopped. He did not fire her. He did not fire her because firing her would mean acknowledging what she had accomplished. It would mean admitting that a simple maid with a worn Bible and a few worship songs had reached his daughter in ways his billions of dollars never could. So Victor retreated into familiar territory, suspicion and surveillance. But the ground beneath him had shifted, and he was no longer certain what he was looking for. The weeks that followed were a strange kind of torture. Every day, Victor watched Adiz and Melody grow closer. Every day he saw his daughter transform from a silent, isolated child into something brighter. And every day, he remained frozen in his study, unable to cross the distance he had created. Some nights, he would walk the hallways of his own mansion like a ghost. He would pause outside Melody's door, his hand raised to knock, his heart pounding with words he could not speak. "I love you. I am sorry. Please forgive me." But the knock never came. The words stayed trapped in his throat, and Victor would return to his study, to his cameras, to the safe distance that was slowly killing them both. Adiz noticed. One evening, as she was finishing her duties in the library, she glanced up at one of the security cameras. She looked directly into the lens, as if she knew someone was watching. Then she signed something Victor did not expect. "God sees you too." Victor's blood ran cold. She knew. She knew he had been watching. She knew, and she was not afraid. He waited for her to report him, to threaten exposure, to demand compensation for the invasion of her privacy. But Adiz did nothing. She simply continued her work, continued her prayers, continued her gentle ministry to a wounded household. And that was when Victor finally began to understand. She was not playing a game. She had no hidden agenda. She was simply doing what people of genuine faith do, loving without condition, serving without expectation, trusting that God would handle the rest. It was everything Isabel had tried to show him before she died, and it terrified him. Because if Adiz was real, then maybe Isabel's faith had been real too. Maybe there was a God who watched over sparrows and counted hairs on heads and brought strange blessings through unexpected messengers. Maybe that God was watching Victor right now, waiting to see what he would do. The thought kept him awake for 3 consecutive nights. December arrived cold and white, blanketing the estate in silence. Melody had been struggling again. The holidays were always difficult. Everywhere she looked, there were reminders of the mother she had lost, the family that had shattered, the warmth that had drained from her world. The nightmares had returned with force. Every night, Melody dreamed of the garden. She dreamed of her mother falling. She dreamed of screaming for help that never came. She would wake in the darkness, her small body shaking, her hands signing desperately into the void. "Help me. Someone help me. Please." But her room was soundproofed, and even if it were not, there was no one to hear. Victor watched the nightmares through his cameras. He watched his daughter wake in terror, watched her cry herself back to sleep, watched her face each morning with shadows under her eyes. And he did nothing. He told himself intervention would only make things worse. He told himself she needed space to process her grief. He told himself all the excuses cowards tell themselves when they are too afraid to love. But on the night of December 15th, something changed. Victor was in his study at 3:17 in the morning, unable to sleep, watching the monitor that showed Melody's room. The nightmare had been particularly bad tonight. Melody was sitting up in bed, her face wet with tears, her hands signing the same desperate plea over and over. "Does anyone hear me? Is anyone there? Mama, where are you? Daddy, where are you?" Victor's chest ached with a pain he could not name. And then, on the hallway camera, a light appeared. It was Adaze. She was walking through the mansion in her nightgown, carrying a candle in one hand and her Bible in the other. Her face was focused, determined, as if she knew exactly where she needed to go. Victor watched her approach Melody's wing, watched her stop outside the door, watched her hesitate for just a moment, as if asking permission from someone he could not see. Then she opened the door and went inside. Victor turned up the audio feed, his hands trembling. Adaze crossed the room and sat on the edge of Melody's bed. She did not ask what was wrong. She did not demand explanations. She simply gathered the trembling child into her arms and held her. Melody collapsed against her chest, sobbing with a grief that had been building for 5 years. For several minutes, they simply sat together. Adaze rocked her gently, the way mothers have rocked children since the beginning of time. Then Adaze began to sing. Her voice filled Victor's speakers, soft and ancient and impossibly tender. The hymn was one he did not recognize, something about a shepherd who searched for lost sheep, about a love that crossed every valley and climbed every mountain, about a peace that passed all understanding. Victor watched Melody's tears begin to slow. He watched her small hand reach up and press against Adaze's chest, feeling the vibration of song. He watched Adaze understand immediately. She took Melody's other hand and placed it against her throat, letting the child feel every note, every breath, every sacred syllable as it passed through her vocal cords. For 20 minutes, they sat together in the candlelight. Adaze, singing. Melody, feeling. Two souls connected across the barrier of silence. Victor could not look away. He could not breathe. When the song finally ended, Adaze's hands began to move. "You are never alone," she signed. "God hears you. I hear you. Your mama hears you." Melody's response came in trembling gestures. "Does my daddy hear me?" Victor's heart stopped. Adaze paused. Her own eyes glistened with tears. "Your daddy's ears are hurt," she signed carefully. "But his heart is learning. Give him time." Victor pushed back from his desk. He gasped for air as if surfacing from deep water. He replayed the footage. Once, twice, 7 times. "Does my daddy hear me?" The question echoed in his skull, in his chest, in the empty chambers of his heart. "Does my daddy hear me?" And for the first time since Isabel died, Victor Ashford finally faced the truth. He had been so afraid of losing more that he had refused to hold what he still had. He had been so focused on controlling the uncontrollable that he had abandoned the one person who needed him most. He had watched his daughter through cameras instead of walking 20 steps to her room. He had hired interpreters instead of learning her language. He had built walls to protect himself and locked her inside with him. The cameras had not exposed betrayal. They had exposed his own cowardice. And they had shown him something else, too. They had shown him what real love looked like. Not suspicious, not controlling, not distant, just present, just patient, just there. Adaze had given his daughter what he should have given her all along. And now Victor faced a choice. He could retreat into his comfortable suspicion. He could convince himself that Adaze was still playing some elaborate game. He could fire her tomorrow, reassert his control, and go back to the cold safety of his isolation. Or he could change. He could learn. He could become the father his daughter deserved. Victor stayed in his chair as the sun rose. He did not move. He did not sleep. He simply stared at the frozen image on his screen, 2 figures embracing in candlelight, and let the walls he had built for 5 years finally crumble. By the time daylight filled his office, Victor Ashford had made a decision. He would not watch from a distance anymore. He would walk into his daughter's world. Can I be honest with you for a moment? This next part of the story is the part that made me pause when I was writing it. What happens next changed everything for this family, and I think it might change something in you too. But before we get there, I want to hear from you. Have you ever had someone show up for you when you needed it most? Have you ever been loved through your pain by someone who had no obligation to care? Drop your story in the comments. I read every single one, and your experiences inspire everything we do on this channel. Also, if this story is touching your heart, smash that like button. It helps more people find these stories, and trust me, more people need to hear what happens next. Okay, deep breath. Let us continue. Victor spent the entire night preparing. He pulled up videos on sign language, basic tutorials, vocabulary lessons, grammar structures. He practiced until his hands ached, forming letters and words he should have learned years ago. I am sorry. I love you. Forgive me. The signs felt clumsy in his fingers. He had spent his career commanding boardrooms and negotiating billion-dollar deals, but these simple gestures were harder than anything he had ever attempted, because these gestures required vulnerability, and vulnerability was the one language Victor had never learned to speak. By the time the sun crested the horizon, he had memorized a handful of phrases. Not enough, nowhere near enough, but a beginning. He stood from his chair and looked at himself in the reflection of the darkened monitor. The man staring back looked old, tired, afraid, but also, for the first time in 5 years, determined. Victor walked out of his study and into the mansion hallway. The distance from his office to Melody's room was exactly 47 steps. He had counted them once, years ago, in one of his rare visits. 47 steps that should have taken less than a minute. That morning, it felt like 47 years. Every step brought memories flooding back. He remembered carrying baby Melody through these same halls, singing her to sleep while Isabel watched from the doorway with tears of joy in her eyes. He remembered teaching toddler Melody to walk in the garden, her tiny hands gripping his fingers, her laughter ringing through the roses. He remembered the last time he had heard her voice, before the silence came, when she had called out Daddy in fear as her mother collapsed. He remembered choosing to stay away, choosing distance, choosing control. He remembered all the bedtimes he had missed, all the homework he had not helped with, all the nightmares he had watched through screens instead of soothing with his presence. The weight of his failures pressed down on him with each step, but he kept walking. He reached Melody's door and stood there, hand raised to knock, heart pounding in his chest. What if she rejects me? What if it is too late? What if I cannot do this? The questions screamed in his mind. The familiar comfort of retreat whispered seductively, "Go back to your study. You are not equipped for this. You will only make things worse." But then another voice rose above the fear. A voice that sounded like Isabel. A voice that sounded like Adaise. A voice that sounded like something deeper and older and truer than his doubt. "She is waiting for you. She has always been waiting. Go to her." Victor knocked. There was no answer. Of course, there was no answer. Melody could not hear his knock. He turned the handle and stepped inside. The morning light was streaming through the windows, casting golden patterns across the floor. Melody was sitting by the window, watching the snow fall, her back to the door. She turned when she felt the vibration of his footsteps. Her eyes went wide. Victor had not entered her room alone in years. He had always sent staff, always communicated through intermediaries, always kept his distance. Now he was standing 3 feet away, looking more terrified than she had ever seen him. Melody stood slowly, uncertain, her hands instinctively moving to sign a question. But before she could form the words, Victor sank to his knees. He brought himself to her eye level, the way Adaise always did. He forced himself to meet her eyes, to see her, to really see her for the first time in 5 years. And then his hands began to move. They were shaking. His signs were imperfect, the grammar of a beginner, the vocabulary of a man who had crammed a lifetime of learning into a single desperate night. But the words were clear. "I am sorry." Melody's breath caught. First was afraid, Victor signed. "Losing Mama. Hurt. Seeing you. Hurt. So I ran away. First, hide. First, wrong." Tears were sliding down his cheeks now, but he did not stop. "First, love you. First, always love you. But I not show. First, fail. First, so sorry." Melody stared at her father, her own eyes filling with tears. "Please." Victor signed. his hands trembling violently now. Forgive me. First, want, learn. First, want, be your daddy. Again, the room fell silent. The snow fell softly outside. The world held its breath. And then Melody launched herself into her father's arms. She crashed against his chest with a force that nearly knocked him backward. Her small arms wrapped around his neck with a strength born of 5 years of longing. Her body shook with sobs that she could not hear but that Victor felt reverberating through his bones. He held her. For the first time in 5 years, Victor Ashford held his daughter like she was the most precious thing in the universe. Because she was. I am sorry, he whispered against her hair, even though she could not hear him. I am so sorry. I am here now. I am not going anywhere. They stayed like that for a long time, father and daughter, healing wounds that had festered for half a decade. When Victor finally looked up, Adise was standing in the doorway. She had come to wake Melody for breakfast and found instead a miracle she had prayed for since her first day in the house. Her eyes were wet. Her smile was radiant. Victor met her gaze over his daughter's shoulder. For a moment, neither of them spoke. Then Victor carefully disentangled one hand from Melody's embrace. His signs were still clumsy, still imperfect, but the words were clear. Thank you. Adise shook her head gently. I do nothing, she said, her voice carrying that musical accent that had once made Victor suspicious and now made him grateful. God do everything. I just show up. Victor shook his head. You did more than show up, he said aloud, his voice rough with emotion. You stayed. You sang. You reached her when I could not reach anyone. You loved her when I was too afraid to love. Adise's smile deepened. The song is not mine, Mr. Ashford. It was always here. In your house. In your heart. In your daughter. I just help you remember how to hear it. Melody looked between them, confusion and hope mingling in her expression. She did not understand all the words being spoken, but she understood something more important. Her father was holding her. Her father had learned her language. Her father was here, present, choosing her. And somehow, impossibly, the woman who sang songs she could not hear had helped make it happen. Melody looked at Adise and signed carefully. You stay? It was the same question she had asked weeks ago. But this time, Adise looked at Victor before answering. Victor nodded slowly. Adise knelt beside them both, joining the embrace. I stay, she signed to Melody. Long as you need, long as God allows. Melody smiled through her tears. And in that moment, in a mansion that had been silent for 5 years, something broke open. Something healed. Something began again. The family that had been shattered was starting to reassemble. And the maid, who had been suspected of betrayal, was being woven into its center. The months that followed transformed everything. Victor threw himself into learning sign language with the same intensity he had once devoted to building his empire. He hired tutors. He practiced for hours each day. He made mistakes and learned from them and kept going. But more importantly, he showed up. Every morning he had breakfast with Melody in the kitchen, not the formal dining room. They sat at the small table, signing to each other about their dreams, their plans, their fears. Sometimes the conversations were clumsy. Sometimes Victor had to fingerspell words he did not know. Sometimes Melody had to slow down and repeat herself. But they were talking. They were connecting. They were building something new on the ruins of what had been lost. Every evening, Victor sat with Melody in the library and helped with her homework. He learned the curriculum at her special school. He celebrated her victories and comforted her setbacks. You are so smart, he would sign, meaning it more each time. Your mother would be so proud. Melody would beam. And slowly, the shadows that had haunted her eyes for years began to fade. The mansion itself transformed. Laughter returned to the hallways. Not just Melody's silent laughter, but actual joyful sounds from staff who had forgotten what happiness looked like in the Ashford household. The strict rules that Victor had imposed began to relax. Staff members smiled when they worked. Some of them even sang, inspired by Adise's example. The cold fortress was becoming a warm home, and at the center of it all was Adise. Victor offered her a promotion within a month. No longer a maid, no longer just staff. I do not know what to call your new position, Victor admitted during their conversation. Caregiver, counselor, family friend. None of those titles feel adequate for what you have done. Adaze laughed, her musical voice filling the study that had once been so cold. I do not need title, Mr. Ashford. I just need to be useful, to serve where God puts me. Victor shook his head. You gave me back my daughter. You gave her back her father. Let me give you something in return. What do you want? Name it. Anything. Adaze was quiet for a long moment. Then she spoke. I want to bring my family here. My parents, my siblings. They are still in Nigeria, still in the village. I send money, but it is not enough. I want them to have better life, better opportunities. Victor did not hesitate. Done. I will arrange the visas personally. They will have housing on the estate. Your siblings can attend the best schools. Your parents will want for nothing. Adaze's eyes filled with tears. Mr. Ashford, that is too much. It is not enough, Victor said firmly. You saved my family. Let me help yours. And so it was done. Within 3 months, the Okonkwo family arrived from Nigeria. Adaze's parents, her 3 younger siblings, all of them welcomed into the Ashford household like long-lost relatives. The mansion that had once held only 2 wounded souls now held 9. And somehow, it felt exactly right. One evening in late spring, Victor and Melody sat by the garden fountain. It was a place Victor had avoided for 5 years. The fountain where Isabel had collapsed. The fountain where everything had ended. But now, it was becoming something new. A place of memory, not mourning. A place where Victor told Melody stories about the mother she had lost. Mama loved roses, Victor signed, gesturing to the blooms around them. She cut them every week. Put them on the table. Melody nodded, her eyes drinking in every detail. She loved you so much, Victor continued. From the moment you were born, she held you and cried and said you were perfect. Melody's hands moved slowly. I wish I remember her. Victor's heart ached, but he did not look away. I will help you remember, he signed. I will tell you every story, every memory. She is part of you. She is always with you. Melody leaned against her father, and they sat in silence as the sun set. Sometimes, when the wind blew just right, Victor swore he could smell roses, Isabel's roses. And sometimes, in those quiet moments, he could almost feel her presence. Not haunting, not accusing, just there, watching over them, pleased with what they were becoming. Maybe Adaze was right, he thought. Maybe God does work through ordinary people. Maybe faith is not foolishness. Maybe Isabel knew something I was too blind to see. He did not have answers to all his questions. The doubt that had hardened his heart for 5 years did not disappear overnight. But it was softening, and for now, that was enough. 1 year after Adaze's arrival, the Ashford household gathered for an evening celebration. It was Melody's 10th birthday, the first birthday she had celebrated with her father truly present. The first birthday in a house filled with joy instead of silence. The dining room was decorated with streamers and balloons. The table was covered with Melody's favorite foods. The staff had been given the evening off, and the celebration was intimate, just the core family that had somehow formed from the ashes of tragedy. Victor, Melody, Adaze's parents, Adaze's siblings, a billionaire and a maid's family sharing a meal like equals, because that is what they had become. After the cake was cut and the presents were opened, Adaze stood and raised her glass of sparkling cider. I want to say something, she announced. The room fell quiet. 1 year ago, I came to this house as a stranger. I did not know what I would find. I only knew that God had put me here for a reason. She looked at Victor, then at Melody. I found a father who was lost. I found a daughter who was lonely. I found a house that had forgotten how to sing. Her eyes glistened, but I also found hope. I found resilience. I found love that had never died, only gone to sleep. And I watched this family wake up. She raised her glass higher. To the Ashfords, to new beginnings, to the God who makes all things new. The room echoed with voices joining the toast. Victor's voice was rough with emotion as he added his own. To Adaze, he said, the answer to prayers I did not know I was praying. Melody tugged on her father's sleeve. He looked down at her. She signed carefully. I want to say something too. Victor nodded, his heart full. Melody stood on her chair so everyone could see her signs. Her hands moved with the confidence of a child who had finally found her voice. Thank you, she signed. Thank you for not giving up on Daddy. Thank you for teaching me about God. Thank you for singing songs I could feel. She looked at her father. Thank you, Daddy, for learning my language, for coming to my room that morning, for choosing me. Victor's tears fell freely. Melody continued. Mama is watching. I know she is, and she is happy. She pressed her hand to her heart. I am happy too. The room erupted in applause and tears and laughter. Adaise's mother was openly weeping. Adaise's father was nodding with dignified approval. The younger siblings were cheering. And Victor and Melody were holding each other, father and daughter, healed and healing, and more whole than they had been in 5 years. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you something personal. Is there someone in your life you have kept at a distance because loving them felt too risky? Is there a wall you have built to protect yourself that might actually be imprisoning you? If this story moved you, if it made you think about a relationship you need to repair or a person you need to thank, do something about it. Today, not tomorrow. You never know how much time you have. You never know when tomorrow becomes too late. And if you have not already, subscribe to this channel. Every week, we share stories that remind us what truly matters. Like this video, if it touched your heart, share it with someone who needs to hear it. Now let me finish this story the way it deserves to end. The security cameras still recorded in the Ashford mansion. Victor had never removed them, but now they captured something different. Where once they had recorded a father watching from a distance, they now captured a father present and engaged. Where once they had shown empty hallways and silent rooms, they now showed laughter and music and life. One evening, Victor sat in his study reviewing the footage, not out of suspicion, not out of fear, just to remember. He scrolled back through the archives, finding footage from the night that had changed everything. Adaise singing, Melody feeling the music, 2 figures embracing in candlelight while a broken billionaire watched from his fortress of solitude. He remembered who he had been that night. Suspicious, controlling, convinced that kindness was a mask for manipulation. He remembered the question that had shattered him. Does my daddy hear me? Now, a year later, he finally had an answer. Yes, he whispered to the screen. I hear you now, and I will spend the rest of my life making sure you know it. He closed the footage and pulled up the live feeds. The cameras showed Melody and Adaise in the library, working on a school project together. Adaise's youngest brother was playing chess with Adaise's father in the sitting room. Adaise's mother was teaching one of the kitchen staff how to make a traditional Nigerian dish. And in the garden, framed perfectly by the fountain where Isabel had fallen, a single rosebush was blooming brilliantly, its petals catching the last light of sunset. Victor smiled. The house that had been silent for 5 years was learning to sing again, not with sounds, but with something deeper. The music of a family finding its way back to each other. He stood from his desk and walked toward the library, ready to join his daughter for their evening study session. 47 steps. This time they took no time at all. So what is the moral of this story? Sometimes the people we suspect of betrayal are the very ones sent to save us. Sometimes the stranger we watch with suspicion is watching over us with love. Faith does not always announce itself with thunder and miracles. Sometimes it arrives quietly, through a worn Bible, a gentle song, and hands that learn a new language just to reach a lonely child. Victor Ashford thought he was protecting his family by controlling everything. What he learned is that control is just another word for fear. And fear, left unchecked, does not protect the ones we love. It imprisons them. The secret the cameras exposed was not betrayal. It was grace, the kind of grace that shows up at 3 in the morning, that sings in the darkness, that kneels beside the broken without asking anything in return. And the greatest secret of all? The love we are afraid to give is usually the love that saves us. Victor's wife Isabel had tried to show him this truth before she died. She had believed in a God who worked through ordinary people, who placed angels in unexpected places, who never gave up on even the most stubborn hearts. Victor had rejected that faith for 5 years. He had blamed God for his losses and built walls to keep out any possibility of hope. But God, it turned out, was patient, and he had sent exactly the right messenger at exactly the right time. A woman from a small Nigerian village, a woman with a worn Bible and worship songs that echoed generations of faith, a woman who saw a wounded family and chose to love them without condition. Adaise had not performed any supernatural miracle. She had simply shown up, stayed present, and let her faith shine in a dark place. And that was enough. That is always enough. Because miracles rarely look the way we expect. They do not come with thunder and lightning. They come with candles and quiet songs. They come with patient hands learning new languages. They come with the courage to knock on doors we have avoided for years. Victor Ashford learned that a $12 billion fortune could not buy one moment of peace. But a maid with a humble heart could give him something money never could. His daughter back, his faith restored, his heart resurrected. And maybe that is the real miracle. Not that the deaf could hear, but that the deaf could feel. Not that the blind could see, but that the blind could finally open their eyes. Not that the silent could speak, but that those who refused to listen could finally hear. If this story touched your heart, I need you to do 3 things. First, like this video. It sounds simple, but that button helps more people find stories that remind them what matters in this world. Second, subscribe and hit that notification bell if you have not already. We share stories like this every single week, and I do not want you to miss a single one. Third, and this is the most important, share this video with someone who needs to hear it today. Someone who has been hurt, someone who has built walls, someone who has forgotten that miracles still happen. You never know whose life might change because you hit that share button. Thank you for being here. Thank you for listening. Thank you for being part of this community that believes in the power of stories to change hearts and transform lives. I will see you in the next story. Until then, stay blessed. And remember, the love you are afraid to give might be exactly the love someone is waiting to receive.